Good morning, Doodlebugs. I have missed you so much, and this is Miss Gina. We're going to do history this morning, and I wanted to get this recording out to you. First thing we're going to do when you come to class tomorrow is we're going to take a look at these brain boosters. Look at number 13. I know these are out of order a little bit, but look at number 13. Marcus is at the grocery store trying to decide which bag of cookies to buy. Yum! Which factor would be the least useful in helping him decide which cookies to buy? A, the color of each bag. B, the price of each bag. C, the number of cookies in each bag. Or D, the flavor of the cookies in each bag. I want you to think about this and be ready to answer these questions just as soon as you log in tomorrow for class, because we're going to have a busy class and I want this ready to go. All right, the second one, use the chart to answer the questions. And the chart is what we use. And if you look at the topics on the chart, you have product, producer, and consumer. The product is gasoline. We want to know who produces gasoline, and the consumer is the people who drive around, probably you and your parents' vehicles. I hope you aren't driving yourself. Next product would be wood siding. That would be something that goes on your house. The lumber mill would be the producer, that's who makes it, and the consumer would be builders who build buildings. They would use that. The third one is computer games. That is the product. Who is the producer? The software company. And students use that, just like some of the ones that we use for instruction. Now, what we're looking for is this question mark right here. Who would be the producer of gasoline? Would it be a gas pump, an oil company, a car salesman, or an automobile factory? I want you to think about that and be ready with your answers just as soon as we get started with class tomorrow. All right, Doodlebugs, as we get into our lesson today, we're going to be talking about life in a monastery. But you should have been working through Unit 7 in history, and you should already know some of this. So this is a bit of a review. In the early Middle Ages, cathedrals were one place where Christians could pray and learn about their faith. Now, we're talking about medieval times, and this is the middle of the historical period that we're talking about. That's what medieval means, is Middle Ages. And churches, Christian churches were beginning to form, and this is a huge cathedral. This is today we're going to learn about another part of Christian church that kept learning alive and helped people in their everyday lives. But we want to review what was the name for the church leader of the Christian church, and that was the Pope. And right up here I have a picture of one of the popes. You may have seen him on the news or on television before, but he is the leader of the Catholic Church. Now, the second question we want to review, how did Christianity spread in the Middle Ages? Well, Christianity spread through missionaries, just like it spread a lot today. These are two families I found. These are missionary families. Missionary families are people just like you and I that choose to go out and teach about Christ and a Christian life. Now, these are just two families, two examples. There are many missionaries across the country today. You may know of some missionaries in your area that or live in your area or go visit. Some people they move to foreign places far away to go and serve as a missionary, or they may just go on a missionary trip for like a week or so. So it just depends, and missionaries go out. Again, they're teaching about the Christian church, and they also do good works in the process. What is a bishop? The bishop is the leader of the church. Now, you have to understand, though, that the Pope is the ultimate leader, and a bishop is also a leader. Sort of like Dr. Daniel at our school is our ultimate leader. He's the head of school, but Miss Marble is the principal. So she would be sort of like a bishop, and he would be sort of like the Pope. Not exactly, but that's a good comparison. And the last thing is, what is the name for the big churches that the bishops ordered built? They are called cathedrals because the bishops wanted a beautiful and awe-inspiring, just amazing place for Christians to come and learn about Christ. And so they ordered that these big cathedrals be built. And these were built across the area, and there were also churches as well, but there were lots of big cathedrals built. Now, during the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, that's what we're talking about, monasteries served as centers of learning and charity, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Monks taught children, this is very important, so listen closely, monks taught children to read and write. They instructed adults. They taught adults how to read and write. They copied and preserved manuscripts because they couldn't just go print a book. If it was handwritten, and if it started being tattered and worn, the monks spent hours and hours and days rewriting those texts so that they would not be lost. And those are called manuscripts. Served as doctors for the surrounding community. They helped serve the surrounding community by providing them medical care and help like that. And they helped take care of the poor in general. Now, they did lots of other things, and we're going to talk about this in class, so make sure you log in. And in the meantime, we're going to read a little story about the day in the life of a monk. Now, before we do that, let's look at the monk. Christianity spreads. Now, as we're working, Christianity is beginning to spread. As the Christian church spread, people came to pray in the cathedral that I just showed you a picture of, and there's another one here, and churches, learning from bishops and priests. Now, priests were a step below bishops. Remember, we said there was a pope, there were bishops, and then there were priests as well. And priests would be sort of like head of school, would be like the Pope, Dr. Daniel. The bishop would be similar to our principal at our school, Mrs. Marble. And maybe the priest might be Miss Knockin, because she's kind of a lead teacher underneath Miss Marble. So there is a level of power and authority as you go. Now, here is a picture of the priest. I did not put a picture of the Pope again, but a bishop. I'm sorry. This is a picture of a bishop, and this is a picture of a priest. I bet you've seen some of these in real life before. And maybe you can share that when you come to class. Now, another group of important churchmen also did important work. They were called monks, which meant alone. And this right over here, guys, is a cartoon character, but it is a picture of a monk. Monks started living together to worship and often had a head monk called the abbot. Now, as they began living together, they actually chose to worship alone. So they spent a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time studying all things about God and developing their relationship with God. So they were alone quite a bit. They were not very loud people. They chose to be very poor. They took a vow of poverty. They never had anything more than exactly what they needed. They never married. They were always men. They never married. They chose to live a life of solitude alone, which that's what monk means, to worship God. And when they did live together in a place, there would be groups of monks to get together and study and serve different communities. They had a head monk named an abbot. And the place that they lived all together was called a monastery. And you can remember that because it begins with an M too. Monks lived in monasteries. Okay, Doodlebugs, we were just talking about monks and the fact that they live in monasteries, and this is a story from the reading room in the OLS, and I'm going to help you get through it right now. So we're going to watch this before class so that when you come to class, you can get busy and have some fun and do some activities with me. Brother Kevin is a monk in an Irish monastery. He's been up since 2 o'clock this morning when a bell rang and woke him for early morning prayers. Brother Kevin left his simple hut and walked to the small church to pray with the other monks. Then he went to the workshop to oil the wooden table he built. The monks here make all their own chairs, tables, and beds. This table will go in the large dining hall where monks share every meal together. The sun hasn't risen, so the long December night hasn't yet turned to day. So it's before daylight. Brother Kevin must work by candlelight. He rubs oil into the tabletop and stops to look at the glowing wood. They worked very hard, and they did make a lot of their own materials. As he admires the smooth piece, he wonders how Jesus might have made it. Jesus was a carpenter too. Brother Kevin blows on his fingers. He's cold. The workshop is a stone shed. A fire is burning in the fireplace, and rocks are stacked in the window opening. But the rocks don't keep the damp wind from sneaking inside and creeping around his feet and hands. Brother Kevin listens for the bell that will summon him to the dining hall. It must be nearly 5 o'clock. He thinks. He knows he should ignore his stomach, but it's almost breakfast time. When the bell rings, he puts on a hooded cloak made of heavy wool and leaves the workshop. So there are the monks. He passes a line of sick and hungry people who have already formed outside the monastery's gates. Brother Seamus will be helping them soon. He knows how to heal illnesses with herbs. He is the only doctor within the 3 days' journey. Nearly every day, villagers arrive at the monastery hoping that Brother Seamus can cure them. They eat breakfast while they wait, since the monks serve food to the hungry first and themselves last. They always serve others before they serve themselves. A faint line of purple has just appeared in the sky when Brother Kevin enters the dining hall. He can smell the fresh bread in the kitchen building next door. He loves the crunch of the thick hard crust with his teeth. There will be no butter on the bread today, though. Monks treat themselves to butter only on Christmas or other special days. They do not have special treats hardly ever. Cooked beans and peas and a few sweet withered apples are also on the table this morning. He remembers to be especially grateful for the apples. They are the last of the fall harvest, kept in a cool dirt cellar until now. Sausage, bacon, and beef are never on the breakfast table because monks know that the poor need meat more than they do, so they give the meat to the poor. Monks keep prayerful silence at mealtime. The only person who speaks is Brother Aidan, who reads to the monks from the Bible as they eat. Brother Kevin finishes his breakfast and waits for the abbot to say a closing prayer. Remember, the abbot is the leader of the monastery. He then goes back to the workshop to finish his table. It's beautiful. He thinks about carving his name in little letters on the bottom, but he decides against it. God will know he made the fine piece, and that is enough. All right, Doodlebugs, I hope you enjoyed that story. Now I'm going to remind you of what the monks do. Remember, they took a vow of poverty. They did not take anything extra. And some of the things they did to serve were they completed laundry and cleaning and they did all of that on their own. They did the laundry services in their community. They provided medical help in their community. And now they didn't do everyone else's laundry, let me correct myself, but they did their own laundry, and some of the monks served in the monastery by doing all the laundry for the monastery. They served medical needs as well as they could to the community. They worked very hard cleaning, spent long hours working very hard cleaning things and making sure everything was spick and span, because that was to glory God. They taught people to read. They taught both children and adults who would come to the monastery. They taught them how to learn to read. They farmed and grew their own food and provided their own food to themselves as well as the community. But remember, they dedicated their lives to the poor. So the poor got the food before they did, even if that meant they had to do without. They were also, remember, they did this all to glory God. And they would pray up to 8 times a day. They would spend hours and hours in meditation and worship, and they would pray up to 8 times a day. They built, just like in the story, they built their own chairs, tables, anything that they needed. They built it from scratch. They didn't do like we do nowadays and go out to the furniture store and buy our own. They also copied books that were in poor shape. They hand wrote them. Remember, there was no way to print or make a copy of a book. And there was no Amazon.com, so you could not just order that book. They had to hand write, and anything that was old and torn, they would rewrite those and spend hours and hours hand writing a book. Think about that. Boy, you better practice that handwriting. They also prepared their own meals, and again, they prepared the meals for others, and they always served the poor and underprivileged before themselves, even if that meant that they did not eat. They also read and studied and studied and studied anything that they could learn about that they felt like that was their responsibility. And they did not talk a lot. Sometimes they even took a vow of silence, and they did not speak for long periods of times. Or they would fast and not eat for periods of time because they felt like that brought them closer to God. Very interesting, these monks. I don't think I could do it because I like to talk too much. But they were dedicated to their God, and they did all of this to glorify Him. Now, what is a monk? Remember, a monk means alone, and it was a religious person. It was a religious man who chose to live in poverty and worship God. What are 2 things monks did during the Middle Ages that kept learning alive? Well, remember, they recopied the books, because if they didn't, the books would be gone. And they also taught people to read, both women and children. And they studied and they taught verbally, not only teaching people to read, they told stories and things like that. A monastery is where they lived. I want you to be able to tell about a life in a monastery. And who did the monks teach to read? That was the children and the adults. All right, Doodlebugs, when you join me for class tomorrow, I want you to be sure and watch this. Join me for some fun in class, and I'll see you then.